Hey, how's it going, friends? Welcome to VR Revelations once again. I am trying to upload videos more frequently. Again, I just uploaded a video a couple of days ago about, the whole UFO topic, so make sure you go check that out. I think it's pretty interesting. But yeah, I haven't been uploading that many videos. Of course, I stopped uploading daily videos about what is going on right now in Ukraine. But I do have an update. I have been keeping up with the news, and of course, right now the big topic of discussion is the offensive that Ukraine finally launched. Right, this long-awaited offensive, which for many weeks and months I was talking about, and it was finally launched by Ukraine. I think about 2 months ago. It supposedly started, and it failed. They didn't make any gains. They weren't even able to reach the first line of defenses of the Russians. If you actually go look at any map, such as the Live UA map, which I've used a lot on this channel, which is pro-Ukrainian, you can go to any place on the map, like let's say Bakhmut, and the Russians have not made any gains there. They have not taken back Bakhmut or any of the towns or the major cities that they have lost to the Russians. So it's pretty clear that this offensive has failed, and Ukraine is in a terrible situation. They pretty much have run out of energy at this point. And I think Zelensky must be shaking in his boots. He must know that, he's not going to have another opportunity like this, like he just had, right, to carry out an offensive of this size. I mean, he was building up for this for months, right, with all the support that he's been receiving from the United States and from all these other Western nations. And, make no mistake about it, the only reason Ukraine has lasted this long in the war, I think it's pretty obvious even to those that are, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Western, that it's because of all the help they have received from NATO, from the United States, from Germany, from these other countries, right? And, this has been televised worldwide. Nobody's hiding this, right? That's why Russia keeps saying that this isn't a war against Ukraine, it's a war against the US and against NATO. And I think that's pretty obvious. Again, the only reason why Ukraine has lasted this long is because of all that help they've been receiving from NATO. If they hadn't received any help at all from all these other Western nations, Ukraine would have collapsed a while ago, right? And so, Russia is correct in their assessment that they are facing off against NATO, and NATO is pretty much just a puppet of the United States, right? The U.S. is like the great leader in that group, and they are pretty much the ones calling the shots. And in reality, they are the ones that created this whole mess there in Ukraine. As has been happening ever since the Cold War, right? These proxy wars, they're not a new thing, right? And most people that support Ukraine don't understand history. They don't understand that this is what empires have done throughout the history of the world, right? You have these major world superpowers throughout the ages, often fighting each other, not directly but indirectly, by supporting one or the other side in these conflicts. Except this time we actually have, sorry, I got to wipe the camera there. Except this time we actually have Russia, involved directly, and so there is a high probability that this could escalate into a nuclear conflict. And so, of course, that would be terrible. We have never seen weapons of this sort at any point in world history, right? humanity now has the ability to destroy the entire planet. And make no mistake about it, if you do just some simple Googling or watch any videos on nuclear weapons, you will realize that just the US alone or Russia alone have enough firepower, have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the entire planet. I mean, it's open knowledge, it's open information that Russia has over 5,000 nuclear weapons, right? That's public information. They probably have a lot more in secret. And the U.S., I believe, isn't too far behind. I think they almost have like 4,000 nuclear weapons that we know of. But anyways, they don't even need that much to destroy the planet. So you can imagine what it would look like in a nuclear exchange between those two countries. And they're not the only ones that have nuclear weapons. We have other countries like China, Britain, or England, whatever it's called nowadays, and I think India also has nuclear weapons. So it's pretty incredible, right? Ever since the discovery of nuclear weapons and the splitting of the atom, that the human race, has the ability to completely end everything on this planet. So that is what is at stake here, right? That is the ultimate danger. That is the ultimate catastrophe. And it's something that humanity has never faced ever, right, in its existence. And so it is pretty amazing. And there is definitely a risk right now with everything that is going on in Russia. And unfortunately, I think the day will come when there will be a nuclear exchange. And, I believe that because I'm religious, right? I believe in the Bible, and the Bible talks about the end of days. And I think that's going to play into those prophecies. But even if you're not religious, I think it's pretty logical to assume that, based on history and all the wars and the fall of empires, and the fact that, whenever new technologies were discovered in the art of war, they have always been used. And of course, nuclear weapons were already used in Nagasaki and Hiroshima by the United States. Many hundreds of them were tested during the Cold War by both the US and Russia, with the biggest explosion ever, nuclear explosion ever, being detonated by Russia. That was the Tsar Bomba, which was absolutely huge. I believe it was 50 megatons. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was supposed to be 100. Now we know that nuclear weapons can pretty much be made exponentially bigger, to the point where you can literally have a nuclear bomb that can destroy an entire state, right? So you would only need, a few dozen to actually destroy a whole continent. And so it's pretty terrifying. And a lot of these Western leaders don't seem to understand that, this is what is at stake. And I think part of that is because they're not, the war isn't close to home. It's not a real danger like it is for Russia or for Ukraine. Maybe those European nations, are a little bit more on edge because they are closer to the conflict. But for the U.S., they're not really, measuring the consequences that could arise from this historical conflict that we're seeing play out right now in this modern era, right? This era of technology. And that's because the U.S. is not close to the war, and they don't actually have, their men fighting in the war. Although, of course, we know that that the U.S. military is in Ukraine, but they haven't declared a war. They haven't, drafted men to go fight or anything like that. So it's not hitting close to home. So, it's not in the minds of people that this could escalate to a nuclear war, or they're not thinking about it at least daily, right? Like the Russians are. And This is one of the big reasons why, since the beginning of the conflict, I said that Russia cannot lose this conflict, right? First, they can't lose it because they are superior to Ukraine in size and technology and everything, right? The only way that Ukraine could have ever have had a chance was if the U.S. literally joined the war physically and all these other countries. But then again, that would result in World War III, and these Western countries are aware of that. So that's the reason they haven't done that, and that's the reason they won't. But mainly, the reason why I said that Russia couldn't lose this is because Russia is willing to go to nuclear war over Ukraine, but the U.S. is not. The U.S. is not willing to get into a nuclear conflict over Ukraine, nor is any other European nation. But Russia will go to war, will use nuclear weapons over Ukraine if it came to that point. And I believe Russia has stated that if this Ukrainian offensive was actually successful, right, that if with the help of NATO and all these other countries, they were actually successful in this offensive that failed, Russia would have had no choice but to use nuclear weapons. And of course, why would you not use them, right? I was talking to a friend who is sort of has this wishful thinking of, nuclear weapons aren't going to be used. That would just, these leaders or these people in charge aren't foolish enough. They will be too scared, which is just, it's absolutely contrary to pretty much the whole history of humanity, right? Men are foolish, and men have always used weapons of war against each other, and nuclear weapons are no different. Again, they've already been used, but we know that once they are used again, it's probably going to be for the last time. And so I was telling him, hey, well, listen, what if you were fighting some bigger guy, right, who you knew was going to beat you, but you realized that you had a weapon that could destroy him completely, or at the very worst, it would destroy both of you. Would you just let the bully beat you up, or would you, use that weapon, right? Logically, you would probably use that weapon to defend yourself. Well, in this case, it's nuclear weapons, and that's why, the U.S., Russia, and all these countries are considered superpowers, because they have these weapons, and that's why we don't see the sort of conquest that we used to see back in the days, right? Because these countries fear each other because of a mutually assured destruction. And so, again, I think that it's pretty clear now that Russia cannot lose this conflict. And I think what is going to happen here is that, the U.S. is going to have to admit that they lost this. They're pretty much at a point where it's either they go all in and risk a nuclear conflict, or they back out and, just say, hey, we had a good go at it. Unfortunately, we lost, so we're just going to have to let, Russia take control of that area of what they have and sort of impose their will in that region. They'll probably realize that it's not that big of a loss for them, territorially speaking, right? Ukraine really isn't that big of a deal for the U.S., for NATO. Of course, they have other countries around Russia, like Finland, that are part of NATO now, where they can install weapons and things like that. Russia actually just, talked about that. And so really, this was just, the U.S. trying to push the boundaries as much as they could, and the U.S. trying to inflict as much damage as they could on Russia. But, this is definitely going to change the way that the world looks at the U.S. and Russia, and it already has changed, right? The order of the world has already changed. We used to think of the U.S. as the leader, right? As the big boy on the block. as the one true superpower. But with Russia, going into Ukraine and sort of, taking on the West, taking all the sanctions from the West, which have backfired. We know that Russia's economy is actually booming. We know that Vladimir Putin's popularity, has only increased in Russia and abroad with its allies. Its relationship with China has grown stronger. So this has had, historical implications, right? I mean, the whole world has pretty much changed before our eyes. Of course, the average man or woman hasn't realized this yet, especially those of us that live, in North America or on the western side of the world. But it has changed, and it's going to be very clear soon that Russia, is going to come out a winner, not only internally, right, before the Russian people, but also externally, because again, the West will not be willing to go to nuclear war over Ukraine. They're just not going to risk destroying the world over Ukraine. And Russia is willing to do that because it is so close to home, right? This is an existential threat to them. And so what this is going to, cause major disruptions, as it already has, to the world economy, to the Western economy, to the prestige of the United States, even as it already has. All these anti-Western countries are only going to be emboldened to resist the U.S. And, for the first time in many decades, Russia is going to be the new vanguard of the world, right? Now, I'm not saying they're going to overtake the U.S. economically. Of course, the U.S. is still the top dog economically, the closest rival being China. But that's very interesting because China is a close ally of Russia, right? And so Russia is sort of like the direct opposition in force against the United States, and China, is the direct opposition economically. So this is definitely going to boil up at some point, and I believe in the future, nuclear war will become inevitable, but I don't think it's going to take place over Ukraine. I think, this is going to be a big shock to the world once it's pretty clear that Russia, completely won in Ukraine, that they had their way, that they resisted the West, that they resisted their sanctions. And I think the West is going to try to downplay this as much as they can, and I think they will slowly turn their attention to China, and so they will try and distract the public away from the, catastrophic failure and of the real-world implications that the war in Ukraine will have, right? And so I don't think they will. It'll be as a big deal before the American public as it is before the world. But there is no going back. As Caesar of old said, the die is cast, and things have already changed. And I think the U.S. is going to find itself in a downward spiral. But in other videos, I've already talked about what I think is going to happen concerning, biblical prophecies and all of these things. And so it's going to be very interesting. But I think that, there's going to be a big decline in the U.S. economically, militarily, and with everything going right now domestically in the U.S., it's only just going to get worse. It's gonna reach a boiling point before the public, and I believe this is going to be a major change for the U.S. internally. Of course, we have the elections coming up. We see what is going on with Trump right now, right? With all these lawsuits and all of these. Pretty much cases that they have against him, so they're trying to put him in jail. We have the election coming up in 2024. Now, if Trump wins, Trump has said that he's gonna via for peace talks with Russia. So I guess that would be good for the world. But yeah, even with Trump in office, there is no going back, guys. This has changed everything. But I don't think the end is just yet. I think there's going to be something beyond Ukraine. And again, I've talked about this already in other videos, but I think it's all according to to biblical prophecy, right? So I think there will be a new world order, and I think that's going to be headed by the United States. I think it's going to be religious in nature, and I think it's going to be, one of its main focuses is going to be to oppose communism, to oppose China, and to oppose Russia. But at the end of the day, we know that, the scripture, the Bible talks about, every nation rising against other nations. And so at the end of the day, when World War III actually starts, it's not going to matter who is on whose side. The whole world is going to be destroyed. But for right now, concerning Ukraine, I mean, that's what everybody is worried about. I don't think we are going to see a nuclear conflict over Ukraine, because at the end of the day, the U.S. is just not willing to risk its own nation, the destruction of its own nation, right? A nuclear exchange over Ukraine. And I think Zelensky is going to be ousted from Ukraine. I think the military or some sort of militia group or something will eventually rise up against Zelensky as they see the country being destroyed under his command. So he will be a failed government, a failed leader. And I think he will eventually flee the country to the U.S. or to some Western countries seeking asylum. And I think there will be a new government formed and established there in Ukraine that will accept, peace conditions, whatever Russia is asking for. Now, of course, we still have the question of Poland. Of course, the U.S. isn't going to stop. As long as they have somebody on the border, to use, they will continue to do so. And so I think Poland, is probably going to be next, the next tool that the U.S. is going to look to use against Russia. And again, Russia just, I think Shoigu was talking about how Poland might be planning to take part of Ukraine, of Western Ukraine. They might use helping Ukraine as a pretext to do that. So they probably have their own ambitions. But regardless, Poland really doesn't pose a threat to Russia either. Again, guys, pretty much what makes the difference nowadays is nuclear weapons. And we only have a handful of countries in the world that have those weapons. They have the ability to destroy the enemy completely. And so this is what makes them so powerful. So really, the only other nations that can rise up, to the superpowers are nations that have nuclear weapons, right? Like the U.S. versus Russia, or China, or Britain, or India, or even Israel, right? That's why, it's such an interesting point in history, the fact that they have these weapons of that have this capability of completely destroying an entire nation. And so it's sort of a checkmate situation right now, but eventually I think it will, develop into an all-out nuclear conflict. But regardless, this is why these, major superpowers, these nuclear superpowers, are able to have their way with these non-nuclear nations, even if they are receiving, support from nuclear nations. Those, like in this case, the U.S., right, is supporting Ukraine, but the U.S. at the end of the day isn't going to exchange, have a nuclear exchange with Russia over Ukraine. They're going, they supported them as far as they could, but at the end of the day, it's just not worth it, right? It's not worth the destruction of the world. And so I think we're reaching that point. I think by the end of the year, we might see Zelensky leaving Ukraine, and the U.S. is going to be, it's going to be clear on the world stage that Russia has won, and Russia will sort of be the new leader, right, or the new powerhouse in world politics. And that's why the U.S. is sort of going to fall into this spiral. But I'll talk about, what I think is going to happen after in more of my videos. And I've touched these topics before, guys. Again, we're all just repeating our, ourselves at the end of the day. You've heard of a lot of this before, but, at the end of the day, I do think that everything is in accordance with the Word of God, with the Bible, with the prophecies that are written there concerning the end of days. And I do think that we are close. Now, nobody knows the day or the hour, but the Bible told us that, we would see signs. And I think all these signs are here. So we definitely have to be watchful, try to stay vigilant. Don't get depressed or discouraged because of these things. But understand that, all of this isn't an accident, that just as there's evil, there is good, that there is a God who has warned us of all these things. And so there is a hope. All you can do is, try to be the best man or woman that you can be. Love your neighbor as yourself. Make a difference that way. Love God. Believe in God. And, believe in the Word. And realize that the Word is true and that these things are taking place. But anyways, that's going to be my little update there on the whole Russian situation. I know it's been a while, guys, but thank you for those who have stayed tuned. I will be uploading more videos. They will probably be from my phone here, as I've done this one, so bear with me. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, as always, that the truth is stranger than fiction. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.